Hi, Stand Up Retail family. It's Edward, and Carrie and I are here with another quick lesson for you to be a more successful leader this year. And today's subject we're going to be discussing is about a skill that most every leader will need to master. And it can be difficult. It can be hard at times. And it's one of those skills that, even your most successful leaders will struggle at.
Very true.
Yeah, it's really true. And it's also for those of you that are new leaders or struggling leaders. This is also one of those lessons that will help you not fall into that trap. The topic that we're going to speak on today is about honest feedback. So with honest feedback, believe it or not, new leaders, you must prepare yourself to learn this lesson to grow. And a lot of leaders in this, when they're dealing with honest feedback, it's really hard because as a leader, you get scrutinized, you get misinterpreted. A lot of times you're misunderstood. I mean, would you agree, Carrie?
100%. I think, being able to communicate effectively is, everyone thinks they're an effective communicator until people do things the opposite of what you ask them to do.
It's so true. I mean, and it's like, and there are many characteristics, Carrie, like what are some of the characteristics that you should have as a effective communicator?
Well, if you don't want to be misunderstood, but you also don't want to be misinterpreted, and you also don't want to be scrutinized or people like really dissecting everything you say.
Oh, that happens a lot.
You got to keep a lot of stuff in mind. You have to be firm, but not overbearing. You want to be direct, but not aggressive. You want to use the correct words and the right body language and the right tone of voice. You want to be friendly, but not familiar. Like there's so many things to keep in mind that it can feel very overwhelming to any leader, particularly new leaders. And struggling leaders often feel like they're very effective in their communication, but don't realize that it could all like their struggles and their lack of results and the challenges they have within leading their team could all actually go back to giving honest feedback with effective communication tools. So
yeah, and you know what, I always find it that it's you cannot talk about honest feedback and not talk about the types of communications. And like I said, there's different types. There's negative or constructive, if we want to look at it that way, and positive feedback. But there's also, when you look at those two, there's the negative feedback without a direction.
Oh yeah.
which is very common for this is one of those traps that a new leader or an existing struggling leader might find themselves falling into, that they're able to address and give the feedback on whatever the constructive criticism or the negative criticism that they need to give on a behavior or an incident or something like that, but they don't give direction to it. And then there's also positive. There's always the positive reinforcement. And this one comes very common when you're a leader that wants everyone to like you. And you tend to be that leader that reinforces everything. And if we just keep it positive and lightly and everything, then everything else will just go away. And it doesn't quite work that way.
No, it most certainly does not. I think, that finding a way to strike a balance is really important when it comes to giving feedback in particular. And like you can be positive And you can share positive or reinforcing observations and praise, or recognition or gratitude. But it can't be the majority of the conversation, because if it is, that's the only part that the other person's going to hear.
Yep.
You know, like if you're going to give that type of feedback and you're going to pepper in some, things to kind of cut the sting of whatever redirection or, challenge that you're trying to address, in terms of behavior or habit or words or whatever it is, then we definitely have to balance, because otherwise we run the risk of people not listening to the right part of the conversation.
Carrie, if you had to break down honest feedback, what is honest feedback?
Well, if you were to just quickly look at the definition of each word, it really tells you what it is. So honest means that you're saying something that's truthful, that it's trustworthy, and that it's genuine. So, based in fact, a lot of times at your employer, these are observations that you've directly made. So they are factual. And you're not really talking about your feelings. Like, this is not like, this is work-based feedback. This isn't like, this is how you made me feel. This is like performance feedback we're talking about. So you want it to be truthful and based in fact. You want it to be trustworthy because it is truthful and you're not embellishing or making something a bigger deal than it is. And it has to be genuine. It has to be something that you yourself saw, observed, and are sharing. Now, the feedback part is really just the information that you've gathered, you're going to be sharing with an individual or a team about what it was and the why it needs to change. For the better, is the most important part of that sentence. So, like, if you really put the two together, honest feedback, it's truthful, genuine information that you're sharing with an individual about something that they did or said or a habit they have that's getting them a result or something that is negative, that needs to improve. And it's you sharing that information to affect a positive change.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, perfectly well said. And, like for me, one of the things that I know that as a new leader, when I was going into this, this was always looked at as being uncomfortable. I remember that feeling in the beginning that I really don't want to do this because I don't know how this is going to turn out, or I'm not for sure. And a lot of that was because I was a new manager and I didn't know how to approach it and how to go into it. I knew it was something that I needed to manage, but I didn't know what I was walking into. To a key point that you always talk about, Carrie, is that it wasn't about me.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times that uncomfortable feeling came in because I was making it about me. Yeah.
Ed, I'm sorry, but those conversations are not about you.
But it's true. But I think as a new leader, that's why they were so uncomfortable, is that they're not for that I always felt that way. But, if you're a new leader out there, there's going to be a poll in the comment below on how, and let us know how, as a leader, you may have struggled with honest feedback, and hopefully by the end of this video, you will be able to effectively communicate with honest feedback to any individual or your team effectively. So what you will find is that feedback is a great way to engage your team. You will find that when you're doing that, which is very important, especially to a leader. And it also opens up the trust. Trust is something that we always talk about, but your team begins to trust you when the conversation is very open, it's very honest, it's two-way. It's a two-way dialogue between the both of you, and that's very, very important. And these are, once you realize and you start to see these things, how they are, I started to look at how I would get feedback from people when I was going into situations. I started to reflect on those, and I realized that some of my biggest moments in my career were the ones where I had conversations with people that were very open and honest. They, you know, it may have been a deep conversation about something that I needed to get better at, but I didn't leave there feeling defeated. You know what I mean? And I found myself even more so going back on my own, soliciting the information that I wanted to be, because I wanted more feedback. And I felt comfortable enough because I knew if I win, I wasn't going to get beat down. Yeah, which is why we like to teach these lessons, because a lot of these things for me and Carrie, they came a little bit later than they probably could have, but these were things that we probably later on learned deep down in our career through trial and error. And, you know, for me,
a lot of experience.
Yeah, a lot of experience, you know. And, you know, for me, everyone knows my story in retail. You know, it was all about me. And I really was, as we said earlier, I really was a manager and not a leader. And it was all about the checklist. You know, you didn't do this, go fix it. And to me, that was effective.
Yeah.
But for a leader that's leading a team or leading people, it's not that effective because it doesn't lead to a result. It's just someone getting something done that didn't get finished on a checklist.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of times, you know, I will tell you, for me, discovering the art, if I will, of actually having a meaningful conversation with someone. When I discovered that, it felt really good, and it made things very comfortable for me, because my very, very first one that I had was not, it was a conversation to redirect someone, but it was a conversation with someone that I was comfortable with. It was someone that I was invested in. It was someone that you could call safe. And I remember that conversation being so collaborative between the both of us, even though it was to redirect and to correct the behavior. But I remember us both leaving so invested in that conversation. She even went on and went out on the floor and talked about how great this conversation was with her peers. And it a light bulb went off in my head. And I just remember when I had that conversation, that anxiety and that uncomfortable place of knowing that I have to have this conversation with this person wasn't there at all.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is something, like, this has to be something. And so it went on to another situation where I had to have it with a really difficult employee that worked under me, that I necessarily wasn't that invested and really didn't think that they were that invested in being on the team. But I still needed to have these conversations. And I remember just, you know what, I'm just going to be honest about it. I'm just going to lay it out on the line. I'm going to make it just like the conversation I had before with my other employee, and just get through it. And I honestly was looking at it like, I'm just going to get through it, do it, pass the day. But I'm just going to frame it the same way I framed that, so that we're both comfortable. And I had the conversation, and it was the same exact reaction. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't scared. The conversation went on. The conversation was good for both of us. It was collaborative between both of us, even though this was someone that I really wasn't that invested in. And the same result happened. I started to see a change gradually, but I started to see a change in the behavior. And I started to realize that, oh, so this is how it's done.
Yeah. That light bulb moment feels really, really good. Nobody taught you how to do that though.
Yeah. No one taught me that. It was all trial and error. And that's why, it's key that like me and Carrie are having these discussions for a new leader or a struggling leader that no one has necessarily not told you. And you may still be in that checklist mode where you're just directing people. But, this is why we do what we do, because a lot of these things we discovered on our own, and we perfected and practiced and continue to practice throughout our careers.
But I think the key is if you're a new leader and you have that worry, or if you are a struggling leader and these conversations are still difficult for you, it's probably why you're struggling to see the results that you want from your team. And getting better at giving honest feedback, and it's an indispensable skill. It really truly is. And one that if you master it or you get good at it, nobody ever truly masters it. But I think, if you get good at it early, you will enjoy success earlier in your career. And you will get rid of that worry. You will get rid of that anxiety. But like Ed said, he had to find a way that worked for him. Because nobody showed him. So we're going to show you the method today that helped Ed have his breakthrough, and hopefully help you guys out there watching and listening get real comfortable doing this to get your success where it needs to be.
Okay, Carrie, so we've talked about what honest feedback is. So now let's discuss why it's important for a struggling leader to practice, to know this, and to master it. There are several reasons why. And a few of them is it drives results. It's good for team engagement. It's probably one of the most key one is that the team starts to trust you, or individuals on your team. And there's so many other reasons why that it's important that you know why you have to use these skills and be honest.
Yeah, I think ultimately those 3 points that you touched on are all can be achieved without good communication and without good honest feedback. I think the key for a new leader, and particularly a struggling leader, is without the ability to give honest feedback the right way and get change and results and trust and engagement the right way, you run the risk of accepting poor results longer than you need to. So, you settle. You find yourself settling a lot and settling for mediocre results longer because you avoid this type of honest two-way feedback conversation. You actually do create disengaged teams that lack trust because you're not addressing it, the elephant in the room consistently.
Right.
Like Ed's example is a really great example of why it's important, because you showed that if you use the same method with someone who you consider to be an easygoing employee that you already have a really well-established, trusting relationship with at work, but you also use that same formula with someone who is a challenging employee, or where a situation is extremely difficult and possibly volatile or just very challenging.
Right.
If you use the same mentality and the same type of system, you are consistent, and that builds a team that trusts and engages with you differently because you're addressing the issue. You're not accepting mediocre results from the person that you think is hard to have a conversation with, but you're constantly giving feedback to somebody who's easy. So it removes the bias, which we've talked about before. So, you're never going to get to your potential, and you're never going to help your team get to their potential if you don't practice this, because you will get results the right way. You will engage your team the right way. You will get them to trust you quicker. So those are reasons why I think leaders, of all shapes and sizes and tenure should practice it a lot.
And like you said, it's a constant practice. It's something that you're going to constantly practice at. Mm-hmm. You're going to constantly pick and get better at, and some things are going to work and some things aren't going to work, and you're going to be able to adjust, but it gives you a roadmap on how you can actually do them. So speaking of getting into it, let's just jump into it. Like, how do you prepare yourself to give honest feedback? Well, it's much easier than you probably think. And I actually have put together 6 steps. And I know 6 steps sounds like a lot, but once you break it down and you understand them, they're probably more of mindsets than they are necessarily written out step 1, step 2, step 3. So think of them
things
as
to keep in mind.
These are things to keep in mind when you're going into having when you're going to deliver honest feedback to someone on your team or to an entire team. Very first important thing is that you must always be objective. I cannot tell you how many times, especially as a new manager, you find yourself walking into situations with your emotions on your sleeve. And when you do that, the feedback is not genuine, and it causes both parties to put up defenses, and you both become very defensive. And you never really address the actual reason that you're there for the feedback. So it's very important that we keep that in mind. So try to view the situation from all angles. And this is also probably that part where that soft skill of empathy is the most important. You know what I mean? Number 2 is going to be behavioral focus. So focus on the behavior and not the person. I think that's a real big one, is that a lot of times we go into it's like me when I go into those when I was going into those conversations and I was learning, I would look at, oh my God, so this is going to be a really tough conversation because I'm having it with blah, 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 blah. But I wasn't focusing on the behavior. You know what I mean? And
if the behavior is unacceptable, or the habit is wrong, or the process is ineffective, like those are factual, objective, observable things. And when you focus on that and you remove the actual personality from your preparation, it really helps you keep the focus of the conversation about what happened and what might need to change and how you're both going to help that happen.
And remember, this is also the part where you want to remember that the reason for you being honest is to bring out the change and not to inflict wound on someone. This is that part where it's really, really, really easy for someone to offend someone if you're not focusing on the behavior, and an individual can feel targeted and things like that. So it's really key that you stay focused on the behavior and not the person.
And also make sure you are consistent.
Yes.
I mean, just within this behavior, this reminder, if you're addressing a behavior with an individual and they need to change it, if other people are exhibiting the same poor behavior or habit or process, or using the same inappropriate language, you need to make sure you are consistent in addressing it. Like you said, Ed, you have to remove that bias and make people understand that it is the observed thing, behavior, habit, process, words, whatever, that is unacceptable and needs to change. It is not the person. And if you're addressing it consistently across your entire team or organization, then it's accepted. That feedback is much more readily accepted because they also see you holding that true for other people who do the same thing.
Right. Carrie, you want to take us to the third one, though? Because it's about balance. The third one is balance the negative and the positive.
All right. So I'm going to tell you a little story about balancing the negative and the positive. I worked for a company and a leader once who called it an Oreo. And it sounds kind of silly, but basically the philosophy was, you give them something that they do that's outstanding, and you sandwich in between two outstanding behaviors they have what needs to change or be redirected. So that's why it's OREO, outstanding, redirect, outstanding. I personally thought it was cute at the time, but it became something where it's like, oh, you're going to give me a cookie. You're giving me a cookie, aren't you? And it became kind of a bit of a joke, but I think there's some merit to just dissecting that, because I honestly don't know if the majority of your conversation should be about the positive.
Right.
Because it's human nature to just focus in on what the person spends the most time talking about.
Yep.
So as close as you can get to 50-50, it probably should be 49% positive reinforcement and recognition of behaviors that are great, that could help them correct the behavior that is a challenge.
Right.
The closer you can get to that being 50-50, the better, I would say.
Yeah.
Only because you do not want that person to leave the conversation really feeling down because you spent the majority of the time talking to them about what's wrong.
Right.
But at the same time, they also don't say, well, she said I'm so great at doing like X, Y, and Z. And then at the very end, she said, but I also show up to work late every day. I need to change that. But she only said that at the last sentence. Yeah. So it's human nature for them to say, oh, this really was about giving me recognition. And if I can get to work on time, that'd be great. Yes. So the balance is really important because you really want that person to leave the conversation understanding what needs to change and how what they do well can help them bring about that change the right way.
Right. So. And that's so true, because number 4 is provide suggestions. And this is where you focus on the team's strengths. And, so you want to chase the negative with positive feed forward. So look at it that way, is that you're planning for a result, but you need to stay focused on the behavior. And like you said, you don't want to give too much positive and you don't want to give too much negative. Yeah. You don't want the person to feel defeated, but you also don't want the person to leave not knowing what it is that they need to fix. Yeah. So taking the strengths that they have to focus on what it is that they need to correct is a good way to balance those two, because you're taking something that they're good at and you're not necessarily recognizing them for it, but you're showing them how they could use this to fix this. And it keeps the behavior the center of the conversation.
Yes.
What I mean? And number 5 is talk to them, not at them. This is where a new leader or a leader that's struggling to get further falls into this trap, because they find themselves platforming when they're giving feedback.
Yeah.
And it falls
Yes.
into that I'm your boss, this is what I need you to do kind of things. And you end up talking at them about the behavior, or you end up talking to them about how they need to fix it and what you need them to do, but you don't give the solutions. You don't mastermind a plan collectively on how to fix. And this takes us back to the it's not about you, it's about them.
And you know what? I think a really quick way to also help you avoid falling into this tell, not teach trap of talking at somebody and like platforming and like saying, I'm your boss, you do this because I'm your boss, is making sure this conversation or the feedback involves questions. Because you want it to be two-way, because when it's two-way, you're talking with someone about how it can change. You're not telling someone it has to change. So asking other people's opinion, what do you think you could have done differently? Or, have you observed other people who are successful at this? What do they do that you think might work for you? Like, there's so many different ways that you can layer questions into this type of a conversation, because feedback, even if you're addressing something extremely serious or a policy violation, people need to understand the why, and the why is not something that you just tell. The why is something you teach, and teaching comes from leading that person to the answer on their own, instead of just telling them what the answer is. So
true. And number 6, probably one of the most important ones, is know the right time and the place to speak. This is very important for any new leader, any struggling leader, any established leader, to be honest with you. That, the best leaders, they know when to speak and when to shut up. And there's that there's always a time and the place for when that conversation needs to happen, especially if you want to keep it honest and you want to keep it collaborative. And I think it's very important that you remember that there's always a time and a place, and give them the ownership. Say to them that we need to talk about this, but you let me know what is good for you, when is good for you. So it's all about knowing the right time and the place to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. It has more of an impact on the effectiveness of the conversation than I think a lot of new leaders and struggling leaders realize. Now, this is not to say that you should be avoiding this or not following back up, but giving up a little bit of the control of when the conversation happens. Like, if you ask the question that Ed offered, which I think is a great question, I would make 2 suggestions. I would say, do you want to talk about this in a few hours, or do you want to talk about this tomorrow morning? Because you also want that person to understand that it needs to be talked about. And then you need to follow up on it, because if that employee says, you know what, I know we need to talk about this, I'd just really like to talk about it tomorrow morning when I'm fresh. If that date is made and you don't show up to that date and you're not prepared to have the conversation, you will lose that employee's trust real quick. And all of a sudden your feedback is no longer truthful or genuine or real in their eyes, because they let you down. You let them down.
Exactly. And they don't see that, then it doesn't become honest to them. They just feel like it goes back to the, okay, now you can't do it, but now you couldn't do it when we agreed upon the time, but now you want to do it. Now it's just, you just remembered and now you want to check it off. You know what I mean? And so
I agree. That one is particularly important, I think, for new and struggling leaders who are in reaction mode. You can't expect to go in and just react and give honest feedback and have it be effective. Sometimes it is, and a lot of times that's lucky, to be honest. But like you need to know the right time and the right place. And sometimes that means you give up a little bit of that power and you ask when it's good for the other person. Because maybe the conversation will be better if they come in prepared and already able to say, I know this was wrong because, or I know why we're having this conversation and this is something that I think I'm going to try to do differently. And that's a lot more productive than somebody just sitting across from you feeling beaten down. Like that's not a leader. That's a bad manager. Not even a good manager, a bad manager.
Yep. So, and just like that, you can too master the art of honest feedback. To recap our topic today, there are many tools out there, I'm sure, that a lot of you will find within your organizations. I'm sure there's a lot of, CBT, computer-based training programs that, your organization will have, referring to honest feedback and how to give feedback. And that's fine. Those can be useful tools. However you decide to practice, we just want you to keep in mind a few things. That practice makes perfect. You won't get it right. You won't get it right every time, but trust us.
Don't be afraid of giving it.
Don't be afraid of it. Remember to be authentic. But also it's very important, even though you're the one giving the feedback, it's also important that you be a good listener. This is where trust resides. So make sure that you're a good listener, and always go in and start from a good place. So always go in looking to address whatever the issue or the behavior or whatever incident that you're addressing, but also go in a good place and addressing it and looking for a way to make things better. What I mean?
I think, for new leaders or a struggling leader, especially people who find that they are reacting a lot, which if they're finding that they're reacting a lot, chances are you are uncomfortable having these types of conversations. They are not easy conversations, and we are not saying that they are. What we're saying is, by keeping those 6 little frames of mind at the forefront of your preparation before you go in, it allows you to be consistent, and it's going to minimize a lot of the tension that you have as a leader going into these conversations. It will also minimize the perceived bias that might happen if you only address things with quote unquote bad employees, but you let good employees get away with similar behaviors or policy violations. So these 6 quick little tips really do help you build trust with your team, engage your team differently, and show a consistency that a lot of leaders who are new and who are struggling because they themselves are getting feedback that they need to change. This helps minimize a lot of that. And I think really is a helpful lesson, Ed. I love the six little top of mind tips are great.
So that's our lesson today. Thank you for watching all the way
through. Good one.
Yeah, I enjoyed this one. Give us a like and hit us up in the comments to let us know how you like to prepare and give honest feedback. Until next time, see you then.
Bye, guys.
Bye.